In April 2015, the small town of Boulder, located in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, was plunged into dark events that shocked all the locals. Boulder has always been known for its scenery and quiet atmosphere, but it was here that a brutal murder took place that kept the police and the local community on edge for a long time. Alice Thompson, a 42-year-old single mother, lived in an old two-story house in a quiet Boulder neighborhood with her 18-year-old daughter, Rachel. Alice was a respectable woman, had a steady job at a local school, and was always considered an example to others. But behind the facade of the perfect family hid problems that no one knew about. Rachel always had a complicated relationship with her mother, especially since she had a new boyfriend, Marcus Wilson. Marcus, a 20-year-old with a questionable reputation, worked at an auto repair shop but was known for his antics and aggressive behavior. Alice disapproved of her daughter's choices, which caused constant conflict in the family. On April 1st, the anniversary of Rachel's father's death, the police received a disturbing call. Alice's friend Jennifer was worried that she had not been in touch for several days. Police officers arrived at the Thompson home to check it out. They were met at the door by Rachel, looking worried and nervous. She reported that her mother had gone to Denver for a few days on business and had not yet returned. However, something in her behavior alerted the officers, and they decided to check the house. The interior of the house was in perfect order, and at first glance there was nothing to suggest trouble. But in the basement, behind the pantry door, the officers smelled a strange odor. Going downstairs, they found traces of blood on the floor, which they tried to wipe away. This left no doubt. Something terrible had happened. However, Alice's body wasn't there, and Rachel claimed she had no idea what could have happened. From that point on, a full investigation began. Officers noticed that Alice's phone had been left at home, even though she rarely parted with it, and her car was parked in the backyard. Some personal items were missing: a wallet, ID, and keys. Rachel looked confused, but her nervousness raised more and more questions. The police began interviewing Alice's neighbors and acquaintances. Jennifer, a close friend, was immediately suspicious of Rachel and her boyfriend. She said that in recent months, the relationship between mother and daughter had become strained to the breaking point. Alice repeatedly complained about the aggression of Marcus and openly stated that she did not want him to see Rachel. The girl, on the other hand, increasingly distanced herself from her mother and spent time with Marcus. This only increased the suspicions of the police, and they began to look for clues. The next day, the police called Rachel and Marcus in for questioning. Marcus claimed to know nothing about Alice's whereabouts and had last seen her about a week ago. He seemed calm, but his alibi was questionable. Checks revealed that he had been seen near the Thompson home on the night of March 31st to April 1st. The investigation deepened when detectives turned to the financial records. It was noticed that large sums of money had been withdrawn from Alice Thompson's account in the final days before her disappearance. This looked suspicious, given that the woman was usually meticulous about her finances. Police decided to check the transactions and security cameras at the ATMs where the money was withdrawn. The footage clearly showed Rachel using her mother's card. Meanwhile, at the scene, forensic investigators found small traces of blood in the garage and backyard. This confirmed the theory of a possible murder. The traces of blood led to a small flower bed at the end of the garden. When the police started digging up the ground, they found a bag of Alice's personal belongings: her wallet, documents, and house keys. The investigation focused on Rachel and Marcus. A check of messages and calls from Rachel's phone revealed numerous conversations with Marcus on the day of Alice's disappearance. Their correspondence was disturbing, discussing plans, mentioning solving the problem and starting a new life. These messages were direct evidence of their involvement in the crime. The police also turned their attention to Marcus. He had prior misdemeanor convictions, and his auto repair shop was located near Boulder. Marcus's co-workers reported that in the last days before Alice's disappearance, he did not show up for work and behaved extremely strangely. He had bruises on his hands and face, which he attributed to a bar fight. A few days later, an anonymous caller reported that a suspicious package partially submerged in water was seen in Valmont Lake near Boulder. Police officers arrived on the scene and, upon lifting the bag, found a heavy object wrapped in polyethylene. When they opened it, they saw a body wrapped in a sheet. It was Alice Thompson. The discovery of the body only reinforced the suspicions against Rachel and Marcus. Investigators began looking for additional evidence. Forensic experts determined that the woman had been strangled, and then her body was attempted to be hidden in a body of water. The autopsy also revealed that the victim's hands bore signs of struggle, indicating that she had fought back against her attackers. Police scrutinized Thompson's family history and discovered that Alice was the owner of a large home and a bank account that was valued at several $100,000. The heir to this property was her only daughter, Rachel. Marcus's financial problems became the motive that drove them to the crime. They plotted the murder to get the money and start a new life. When detectives searched Marcus's apartment, they found a sheet identical to the one in which Alice's body was wrapped. There were traces of blood on it, and a DNA test confirmed that it was the victim's blood. They also found photos of Alice's bank cards and documents taken shortly before her disappearance on Marcus's phone. This became the decisive evidence linking them to the crime. Local newspapers and television began to cover the case extensively, calling it murder for inheritance. The public was shocked that an 18-year-old girl could take such a step for money. Reporters described Rachel as a quiet and calm student, which created an even greater contrast to the brutality of the crime. Reporters surrounded the Thompson home, trying to interview neighbors and learn more about Rachel's character. Meanwhile, the investigation continued to gather evidence. Police noticed surveillance footage near Lake Valmont. One of the recordings clearly showed Marcus's car pulling up to the lake on the night of the murder. Two people, a man and a woman, got out of the car, and after a few minutes, they threw something into the water. This footage became the key to the case and confirmed Rachel and Marcus's involvement in the crime. The police organized the arrest of the couple and searched their cars. In the trunk, they found the remains of a rope and traces of blood, which finally confirmed their guilt. Rachel and Marcus were detained in their apartments in the early morning before they realized what was happening. Police officers burst into Marcus's home, where they found him asleep on the sofa, and on the kitchen table were the remains of documents and bank statements belonging to Alice Thompson. In Rachel's apartment, they found numerous photographs of her mother torn to shreds, as well as a draft of a will in which Alice had given all of her property to her daughter. When questioned, Rachel denied any involvement in the crime. She claimed that she had been out with friends the night of her mother's disappearance and did not know where Marcus was. Marcus, for his part, behaved more confidently and aggressively, denying all charges, saying that the police had fabricated evidence against him. But investigators continued to press them, using separation tactics and long interrogations to expose inconsistencies in their testimony. Rachel, despite her age and frailty, held firm. She denied all charges, but the experts noticed that her answers became increasingly confused and inconsistent with Marcus's testimony. As the interrogations continued, the police began to dig deeper into the Thompson family history. It turned out that Alice Thompson had recently rewritten her will, leaving a significant portion of her estate to Rachel, despite their constant conflicts. This will become a key motive for investigators. It also turned out that Alice was going to change it again, and her lawyer received a letter asking her to prepare a new version of the will that would give a larger portion of the inheritance to charitable organizations. This news came as a shock to Rachel and probably the reason for her decision to act. Correspondence with the lawyer indicated that Alice was going to formalize the will in the next few days. Investigators speculated that Rachel learned of her mother's plans and decided to act quickly to prevent changes to the will. An important task for the investigation was to find additional evidence that would support their accusations. Experts seized the suspect's cell phones and laptops. They found that in the weeks before the murder, Rachel had actively searched the internet for information on how to dispose of the body and what drugs caused death without leaving traces. These inquiries only confirmed the suspicions of the investigation. Marcus, on the other hand, had bought rope and plastic bags from a local construction store a few days before the crime, which was caught on CCTV. He paid in cash, but the sales clerk remembered him because of his aggressive behavior and attempts to hide his face. Detectives matched the footage and found that the items purchased matched the items found at the scene. Investigators also discovered that Marcus owned a small abandoned garage near Boulder. When they arrived at the location and began an inspection, they immediately noticed traces of blood and a washed-out stain on the concrete floor. Experts ran a test that confirmed the blood belonged to Alice. The garage was used as a temporary place to hold and kill the victim before disposing of the body. After gathering more information about financial transactions, investigators discovered that the day before the murder, Alice had withdrawn a significant amount of money, about $10,000, from her bank account. This was an unusual act for a woman who had always been careful with her finances. Police officers began to investigate what the money might have been used for. When they checked the surveillance cameras near the ATM, they saw Alice on the footage withdrawing the money. A few minutes later, Marcus appears next to her and they discuss something, and then Marcus takes the money and leaves. Investigators speculated that Marcus may have blackmailed Alice by threatening her daughter or demanding money for her silence. This explained why the woman withdrew such a large sum of money and gave it to Marcus. However, the money was not found in Marcus's or Rachel's possession, suggesting that they had managed to hide it elsewhere or had already spent it. This became an increasingly obvious motive for the murder. Then it became clear that Rachel and Marcus planned to gain full control of Alice's fortune, including the house and bank accounts. Forensic experts have established the exact time of Alice's death, the night between March 31st and April 1st. CCTV footage of her home showed that Rachel and Marcus entered the house that evening. No one else left the house until the morning. This was a key piece of evidence in the case that virtually eliminated any possibility of their alibis. The investigators tried to reconstruct the chain of events of Alice's last evening. They found that the woman returned from work around 6 p.m., and Rachel and Marcus were already in the house. Most likely they were waiting for her, having planned the attack in advance. When Alice entered, an argument broke out, possibly over finances or the threat to rewrite the will. Marcus, being physically stronger, probably began the attack immediately, with Rachel helping him restrain her mother. Traces of a struggle in the garage confirmed that the woman tried to resist, but was quickly tied up and dragged to the basement. There, the perpetrators decided to strangle her using the rope Marcus had purchased earlier. It was a cruel and cold-blooded massacre, the motive of which was greed and the desire to get rid of the only obstacle to money. However, despite the abundance of evidence and testimony, investigators faced a number of legal obstacles. Marcus and Rachel pleaded not guilty and hired one of the best defense attorneys in Colorado. The defense attorney focused on undermining the credibility of the evidence, pointing out errors in the evidence collection procedure and possible manipulation by the police. The situation escalated when defense counsel requested an independent review. The court authorized a reanalysis of the evidence, which slowed down the process. During this time, Rachel and Marcus were in custody, but the lawyer fought vigorously for their release on bail, arguing that the investigation had fabricated evidence. Investigators realized that time was playing against them and began gathering additional witness statements. They reached out to Rachel's friends and acquaintances to see if she had discussed her plans or shared any suspicious thoughts in recent months. One of Rachel's friends admitted that Rachel had repeatedly talked about hating her mother and even mentioned wanting to get rid of her. These words became an important piece of evidence for the prosecutor, bolstering the conspiracy murder charge. The case began to be actively discussed in the media. The public was shocked by the brutality of the crime and the fact that their own daughter could kill her mother in cold blood for money. Newspapers wrote about it daily, and television showed footage from the crime scene and interviews with neighbors who were stunned by the news. Amid the growing interest in the case, the police continued to gather the final evidence needed for an indictment. After weeks of interviews, evidence analysis, and public pressure, the case against Rachel Thompson and Marcus Wilson finally began to move toward trial. Prosecutors gathered all available evidence to present a picture of the murder of Rachel's mother, Alice Thompson. But despite the evidence collected, the defense attorney was looking for any loophole to acquit his clients, or at least reduce their guilt. The evidence gathered was overwhelming. DNA traces of Marcus and Rachel in the victim's home, financial records, testimony from friends confirming their hatred for Alice, and surveillance footage showing the suspects entering the house and not leaving until the wee hours of the morning. But the defense attorney, Douglas Cross, understood that his clients needed a defense that could shake the jury's confidence in guilt. Cross focused on evidentiary issues. He argued that the police had violated procedure in gathering the evidence and insisted that the tapes of the interrogations had been conducted in violation of the suspect's rights. He demanded the exclusion of all evidence that he believed was illegally obtained. The judge denied most of the defense lawyer's motions, but some materials were excluded, which came as an unpleasant surprise to the prosecution. Prosecutors were confident, however, that they still had enough testimony and evidence to secure a conviction. The investigation focused on examining the psychology of Rachel and Marcus. Rachel grew up in a well-to-do family, given every opportunity for a successful life, but her relationship with her mother had always been strained. Alice was a strict woman who kept everything under control. This made Rachel irritated and jealous. She blamed her mother for interfering in her personal life, restricting her freedom and preventing her from making independent decisions. Marcus Wilson, on the other hand, came from a poor family and was used to doing things on his own. He was a street fighter with problems with the law and frequent bouts of aggression. When Rachel met him, she was attracted to his confidence and strength. She saw Marcus as a way to escape her mother's control and find freedom. Marcus, however, noticed Rachel's dissatisfaction with her position and quickly realized he could use her weaknesses to his advantage. Investigators discovered that from the moment they met, they began plotting how to get rid of Alice and seize her fortune. Rachel discussed with Marcus her hatred of her mother, her constant humiliation and control. Marcus supported her, promising to help her get rid of the problem. A review of the financial records revealed even more details. Shortly before the murder, Alice Thompson had entered into an agreement with a bank to transfer a substantial amount of money to an investment fund. This money was to be the basis for a fund she planned to run after retirement. However, in the weeks before her death, Rachel began to take an active interest in the details of this fund and attempted to access her mother's accounts. The bank counselor testified that Rachel repeatedly went to the branch and asked for information about her mother's accounts, but was refused. This supported the investigators' version that the motive for the murder was access to the money. After Alice's death, the money was to go to the sole heir, Rachel. The couple hoped to use the funds for a new life, away from Colorado. While analyzing Rachel and Marcus's personal belongings, experts found a thumb drive that led to new evidence. The flash drive contained correspondence between Rachel and Marcus in which they discussed the details of their plan. The emails discussed various methods of murder as well as follow-ups, how to dispose of the body and what alibis to use. In one correspondence, Marcus suggested poisoning Alice, but Rachel rejected the idea, fearing that a toxicology report would reveal poisonous substances. They discussed other ways of murder, but finally decided to strangle the victim to leave no trace. The experts also found drafts of a will that Rachel had prepared in advance. These documents clearly stated that the entire estate would pass to her without conditions. Alice's original will, which allocated a large portion of the funds to charity, would thus have been tampered with, and Rachel would have gained full control of her mother's estate. Alice Thompson's body was sent for a detailed toxicology examination to see if it had been poisoned before death. The analysis revealed traces of sedatives that may have been used to weaken the victim before the main attack. This confirmed the investigation's version of a pre-planned crime. Experts found that the drug had been added to Alice's tea a few hours before she was killed. This explained the lack of significant resistance on her part. She was too weakened to fight. Given that Rachel had prepared her mother's tea on the day of her death, investigators concluded that she was the one who added the drug to the drink. Before the trial began, the parties agreed to a preliminary hearing where prosecutors presented key evidence and witnesses. Among them was a bank counselor who confirmed Rachel's attempts to access her mother's accounts. He said that she was extremely aggressive and tried to manipulate employees to find out details of financial transactions. A toxicology expert also testified and explained in detail how the drug entered the victim's system and how it affected her. His testimony strengthened the prosecution's case for premeditated poisoning murder. But the most significant witness was Alice's neighbor, who saw Rachel and Marcus driving away in a car the night of the murder. He told police that he noticed the couple's strange behavior and decided to memorize their car. This information helped the investigation to confirm that they were the ones in the house at the time of the murder. The defense attorney built a line of defense around the idea that the evidence was not strong enough and could have been fabricated. He argued that the police violated procedure in collecting evidence and also accused them of pressuring witnesses. Cross also stressed that the testimony of neighbors was unreliable because they saw the suspects at night and could have been mistaken. In addition, the defense insisted on the version of Alice's accidental death due to a heart attack. The defense lawyer tried to present the case in such a way that Alice, experiencing severe stress due to the conflict with her daughter, could have taken a lethal dose of the drug herself, which led to her death. Prosecutors, however, were convinced they were right. The evidence pointed to a planned murder, and even the defense's attempts to undermine their credibility could not change the overall picture of the crime. The upcoming trial promised to be dramatic and tense, with both sides ready to present their arguments in front of the jury. Investigators continued to analyze testimony, gather additional evidence, and prepare witness statements. An important element was a thorough examination of Rachel's life and her relationship with her mother. It emerged that in the last months before the murder, Rachel had become more aggressive and distant, avoiding communication with her mother and focusing on her plans with Marcus. The prosecution also gathered numerous testimonies from friends and acquaintances who confirmed that Rachel had repeatedly expressed hatred for her mother and talked about her intention to end her life. This testimony was to be an important addition to the case, showing that the murder was carefully planned and had a financial motive. At this stage, the case of Rachel and Marcus began to attract increasing public interest. Journalists followed every step of the investigation and prepared to cover the trial, providing the public with details that revealed the gruesome details of the murder. The prosecution was ready to present all the evidence gathered during months of painstaking investigation. Both sides, the defense and the prosecution, were confident that they could convince the jury of their version of events. The trial promised to be one of the most high-profile cases of the year, covered by local and national media, and would reveal all aspects and motives of this horrific crime. The trial for the brutal murder of Janet Alice Thompson began in a Jefferson County courtroom. In a trial that was to be a high-profile event, the jury was to delve into the dark motives of Rachel Thompson and her boyfriend, Marcus Wilson. The prosecution framed the defendants as cold-blooded killers willing to do anything for material gain. During the first week of the hearing, the prosecutor presented key evidence. The focus was on Rachel and Marcus's correspondence, which showed that they had planned the crime in advance. The messages, filled with hatred for her mother and dreams of money, sounded like a direct confession. The prosecutor emphasized that Rachel actively persuaded Marcus to commit the murder by promising him a share of the inheritance. The smartphones were an important piece of evidence. GPS data confirmed that they were near Alice's house on the night of the murder. Moreover, the prosecutor presented surveillance video from the store where Marcus bought the tape and rope, the same ones found at the crime scene. This was preparation for a takeover planned in advance. Witnesses, employees of the store, confirmed seeing Marcus that evening. All of this pointed to careful planning. The second week of the trial was devoted to forensic evidence. A DNA expert confirmed that traces of both defendants were found at the crime scene. Traces of Alice's blood on Marcus's clothing indicated that he was directly involved in the crime. Rachel's fingerprints were found on the neck of the liquor bottle used to hit the victim's head. A medical examination shed light on the grisly details of the murder. The pathologist reported that Alice was attacked from behind, immobilized by the blow of the bottle and then strangled. The blows indicated intense anger on the part of her attacker, which the prosecutor believed confirmed a personal motive. Alice fought for her life, as evidenced by the marks on her arms and legs. Bloodstains throughout the house confirmed the chaotic nature of the scene. In the third week of the hearing, the defense attempted to change the course of the case. Rachel's lawyer argued that she was a victim of manipulation by Marcus. According to the defense attorney, Marcus threatened Rachel and coerced her into participating in the crime. However, the prosecutor cited phone records that refuted this version. In those recordings, Rachel calmly discussed the details of the plan and showed no fear or doubt. Marcus's lawyer, in turn, insisted that his client was involved in the crime under pressure from Rachel. He claimed the girl manipulated Marcus, threatening to break off the relationship if he refused to help. But testimony from Marcus's former friends pointed to his aggressive behavior and unscrupulousness. One witness even claimed to have heard the guy talking about the easy money he would get if the old lady disappeared. Final week, the court heard closing arguments. The prosecutor reminded the jury that Rachel and Marcus committed the murder for money and showed not a shred of remorse. The defense, for its part, continued to insist that Rachel was the victim of Marcus's manipulation, and Marcus was the victim of pressure from Rachel. Nevertheless, the evidence pointed to the cold-blooded planning and execution of the crime. After 3 days of deliberations, the jury reached a verdict. Rachel and Marcus were found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced both to life in prison without parole. There was a sepulchral silence in the courtroom as the judge announced the sentence. Alice's relatives wept, realizing that justice had been served, but their loved one's life could not be restored. After the trial ended, new details began to emerge. Reporters found out that Rachel and Marcus discussed the possibility of leaving to another country after receiving the inheritance. They dreamed of starting a new life by buying a house in Mexico. Those plans were shattered when they were arrested, and now many years in prison cells awaited them. The case of Rachel Thompson and Marcus Wilson has become one of the most high-profile cases in Colorado. The brutal murder and the family's tragic story shocked the public. Alice's family and friends hoped that this crime would be a lesson to those who are willing to do anything for money.